How's everybody doing today? I want to take the time real quick to just say thank you to everybody that is rolling into this. I am really lucky today to have a bunch here from the Appalachia team, people that I get to work with directly, and all of them I can tell you from personal experience, they're amazing. So without any further ado, I would like to bring them on stage. Once again, thanks for being here, and let's get this started.
Hey.
How you doing, everybody?
Doing well yourself.
Good. Good afternoon.
Fantastic. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
Awesome. So I thought that I would start off first just by thanking everybody for doing this. It's super cool when we can actually pull people from our own team because everybody here has their own different experience. And today's conversation is going to be driven around the NIST CSF, which I'm not going to tell you what that is. These guys are, and their information and the knowledge they have about this and how to help organizations, both small, medium, and large, is amazing. So we're going to dive into these topics today. And as far as the crowd that's here, I would recommend stay engaged. Feel free. I mean, you guys, you have these guys for an hour. So ask questions, post something in the comments. And if we don't get to your question during this feed, we'll certainly try to answer it afterward for you. So without further ado, I would like to just have each one of you just do just a quick intro so we can learn a little bit about you. If you have a funny joke, feel free to tell us or what have you. But Ashley, I'm going to start with you since you're right beside me in order there.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Loudon. I am in sales and marketing with Appalachia Technologies. And today I will be serving as the technical MC, I guess. So if there are questions, just go ahead and add them into the comments and we'll make sure that we get some attention on those and help everyone out. Thanks.
So Ashley is the master controller for today. It's going to be controlling all the comments. If any of us start saying too much, she's probably just going to remove us from this conference as well. She has the power to do that, actually. So, all right, Jimmy, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Nice to be here with everybody. My name is Jimmy Armour. I'm a vCISO and senior security consultant for Appalachia Technologies. I have just under 8 years of experience in the cybersecurity space. I've been here just over 2 years at Appalachia. Have a lot of Fortune 500 experience. Really technical endpoint security, SOC analyst, that sort of thing, and then moved over into the GRC space. The governance, risk, and compliance, where we work with clients to do what we're doing and talking about today with the NIST CSF and adhering to the NIST CSF and what that means and all the challenges that overcome that specifically, but other frameworks as well. CMMC, ISO 27001, PCI DSS, SOC 2 Type 2, all that type of stuff. So yeah, really excited for today.
Yeah, we appreciate having you here as well. So Joel, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. My name's Joel Prentice. I'm also a senior security engineer with Appalachia. I've been with the company for 5 years now. Been doing this for about 10. I worked in the compliance side of things, and then went to the pen testing side, which is where my current role is. I really got interested in that because I wanted to hack the Gibson early on in life. I found out about that, and that kind of became a life goal. And now I do it, and it's awesome. And I enjoy the field of cybersecurity because it allows you to continue to learn every day. It's not a job that you learn a skill and then you just take that skill for the rest of your life. You you have to stay on top of things and really challenge yourself daily.
No, I love that. And the nice thing about Joel today is he's going to be bringing a different perspective from a pen tester's eyes today. So we have a broad set of knowledge here today. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of dive into that a little bit. So, all right, next we have Terry. How are you, Terry?
Hey, I'm great, and thank you for having me. So I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing here at Appalachia, and I've been here for 8 years. Before that, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, I started in IT in 1993. And I transitioned to what we say the dark side, which is sales and marketing in 2011. But it's great because I get to be around technology and lots of smart people like those on the call today. So I absolutely love doing what I do, working for Appalachia, started here in 2016, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry. We appreciate you being here as well. And the opportunity to think this was actually Terry's idea to kick this off a couple months ago. And it's really cool when everybody can come together and do something like this that we're all passionate about. So next we have Yoel. How's it going, Yoel?
Loving it. My name is Joel Alvarez, also providing senior security consultant services on the Appalachia side. I've been doing IT and cybersecurity in general over 15 years now. A background in hospitality, networking, and throughout compliance requirements for small, medium, and large companies. Appalachia has given us a great opportunity because we get to play with big names across multiple industries, CSF being a standard across the board. So we get to see how it's implemented in real life. And then we come in and help them at least optimize on the way it's presented and utilized to the full extent, rather than be treated like a simple standard to take security to the next level. But excited to be here and excited to share some of that experience with the audience and collaborate with the team here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And Yoel's one of those guys, we can have a conversation about something for 3 hours. And at the end of that conversation, you walk out feeling like you just got a college degree. And so his information, just technical, everybody here, their technical expertise is unbelievable. So next, I'm just going to dive into some questions and just get the conversation flowing a little bit. And as we talked about, we want to keep this an open conversation. So Jimmy, I'm going to pick on you. And so today, obviously, we're talking about the NIST CSF. And we know that there have been some changes come out lately, but there's also, we take it for granted because we work in this industry every day that, most people know about this stuff. And it's something that hits me often, something, everybody knows about this, but I feel like unless you're close to it, that's not always the case. So I'm going to ask you, right? So first, what the heck is this thing called the NIST CSF? Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those that aren't aware, the NIST CSF and acronyms galore, right? I mean, that's the same in any industry. So just to quickly break it down, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They are a federal agency, I believe, a part of the Department of Commerce. They effectively have a bunch of different frameworks that I could list out, but it's a bunch of numbers and a bunch of other acronyms. But the one that we're talking about today is the NIST CSF, or the Cybersecurity Framework, which is what CSF stands for. It was originally developed, I believe, in 2014. So it's kind of nice that 10-year anniversary, they come out with a 2.0 version of the NIST CSF. But yeah, I think 2017, 2018, they came out with 1.1. But it was originally developed in line with manufacturing and finance. And you can kind of see that based off of the language that the framework actually holds, supply chain, that sort of thing. But a lot of people were looking for some sort of way to break into cybersecurity compliance or increasing their maturity. And the NIST CSF has a maturity model that really is one of the greatest. It's up there, right? And a lot of frameworks are kind of sisters of each other in a way. They say a lot of similar things, maybe just slightly different. But I really do like the changes that NIST CSF came out with in 2.0, and we're going to talk about them here today. So I don't necessarily need to dive into those explicitly now. But yeah, it's a great framework for anybody to use, even if you don't have a compliance reason to necessarily have a cybersecurity framework. But if you don't even know where to start, increasing your cybersecurity maturity using a cybersecurity framework, the NIST CSF is public, it's free, and it's the de facto standard that I would recommend to other clients unless they need some sort of other framework that they need to adhere to.
I think we all like free, right? So,
Yeah,
so
right.
just to look at the NIST framework, the NIST CSF, and start reading through those controls to kind of see, what are we doing? What are we not doing? What should we be doing? What do we not know about? Right. So let me ask this, like you said, this framework's been out for a while. Not too long ago, as you mentioned, they came out with a major revision, 2.0. So at a high level, what are some of the major changes? And any of you feel free to chime in on this as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest one, and I really like that they did it on the 10-year anniversary. They kind of shook everything up a little bit. And I think it's going to be difficult for some companies that already adhere to the NIST CSF, because the NIST CSF is based off of domains, categories, and subcategories, right? And there's always been 5 domains: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, right? 5 domains. And I know that I talk with my hands, I'm sorry. But one of the biggest changes that you'll even be able to see in the NIST CSF graphic is the addition of a 6th domain. And oh, thank you. That's perfect. That you can see the 6th domain. And I love the visual importance of the way that the 6th domain of govern is pulled around here. While governance isn't new to the NIST CSF, it always was a part of identify. There was some things in respond and recover that dealt with governance. There were things in protect and detect. It spanned the entire all 5 domains. It's so important that they pulled it out and it nailed the graphic, because govern it has ties to everything. But I think this is one area that a lot of companies will struggle, because their scores, if they do the maturity and they're looking at their target and they want to increase in maturity, they've been going off of 5 different scores: a score for identify and protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now they're going to have a 6th score, and moving some of these subcategories and categories from other 5 domains, they're going to be moving them into that 6th category or 6th domain, and it's going to really shake up the scoring. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that companies that already adhere to the NIST CSF are going to face. But nothing's really net new. It's just kind of a big shift. And there's some other minor changes. There used to be 108 subcategories or 108 controls or 108 things to read to map yourself to, right? Um, that's a lot, right? For someone who doesn't know a lot about cybersecurity or wants to dip their toe into it. The NIST CSF went down to 106. I know it's not a big change. It's only -2, right? But even with the addition of a new domain, they're not increasing the amount of controls that you have to adhere to. They're actually reducing it by a little bit. So I really like the changes that they've made. There's other minute changes in terms of language. Like I said initially, then the CSF really came out as a framework specifically for the manufacturing and finance industries. NIST has seen that it is basically the de facto standard for any company, regardless of industry. So they've adjusted the language slightly to be more inclusive of those industries, as opposed to just the finance and manufacturing industries.
So you mentioned, there's hundreds of controls, right? So, and many that are watching may already be using the NIST CSF, but for those that have never seen it before, and they take a look at it, and they're racking their brain saying, well, there's no way we can get all of this done, right? Or you have companies at the same time that have been chasing alignment with the NIST CSF for years. And we talked about this the other day. What's good enough, right? So can you talk about that a little bit? Because there's no silver bullet in cybersecurity. We all know that. So what's good enough at this point?
Yeah, and that's the question that all of us struggle with, right? And it's really difficult to answer, because it changes based on client needs. It changes based on the client itself. It changes on the industry that they're in. It changes on their maturity level, right? It changes on the threat landscape and how the threat landscape is adjusted. I mean, just not too long ago, we didn't even really have AI in the cybersecurity space, right? And now AI has blown up in the past few years, and everybody's using it. And all the tools out there claim that they have AI integration. They really don't, but that's another topic for another day. Um, but there's a lot of things that it's challenging when you don't have a cybersecurity framework, or you're trying to break into it. The NIST CSF reads really, really well. Um, but I really think I really like the changes of the NIST CSF 2.0 and bringing the governance to be able to tie into all the different domains, all the different categories, and changing the language to make it more inclusive for all the other industries. But to get back to your original question, I think it's really challenging, because it really just depends per client, and that's something, talking to Yoel, talking to Joel. Um, what's the cost benefit analysis, right? Where they are today, what do they need to get to, in our professional opinion, to get to the next maturity level? what risk does that help, right? And everything comes back to the question of risk and comes back to senior leadership and the corporate leaders, and talking about what's the cost to bring us up to that next step, and what does that do in terms of reducing the risk that it addresses. So everything's a cost benefit analysis, everything's based off of risk, and there's no real easy answer, and that's probably one of the most challenging things with it. But at least on a case by case basis, what I recommend in terms of good enough, just start. Right, you're never going to know where you are unless you
Yeah.
start and get a baseline now, and then work to try to improve and create that 3 to 5 year plan. 3 years, you can kind of know where you want to be. In 5 years, the threat landscape is probably going to change a little bit. So you're probably going to need to readjust, right? And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly acceptable. It's just a matter of planning and then trying to strive to achieve that. And I've made this reference to clients. The cybersecurity landscape and threat landscape is this big buzzword that we throw around, right? But effectively, it just means the tactics, techniques, and methods that attackers are using to attack your attack surface or threat surface, right? Which is, do you have systems that are open to the internet? Do you have email, right? Do you have employees that have admin? Like what specifically are ways that an entity could attack you? That's your attack surface. And then what tactics and techniques are they going to use to attack you, right? Those, especially with the development of AI, have increased in maturity and increased in just even availability, right? It's super available that someone could go out and get some malicious code that they put into an email, and then they send it out to organizations. The barrier of entry for black hat actors is very, very low, and it was low even before, because they could download Kali Linux and it's free, and they just need to know how to partition their drive, or get another device that they could load Kali Linux on. But understanding that the threat landscape is constantly evolving in maturity, it's like a cup of water, right?
Right.
The cup of water is constantly filling. You doing nothing, you are going to get below. Like if you take the cup and you mark the cup, this is where we are now. If you do nothing, the maturity is increasing of the attackers. If you do nothing, your mark is right there. It's not moving. You need to constantly increase your maturity to even stay constant
So
with your score.
So it's getting better. Like for me, when someone asks, what is enough? And I always say, well, it's never enough. And we always need to strive to be doing a little bit better. And I think Yoel and Joel could probably say here, I mean, have you guys ever walked in to an organization doing an assessment? You're like, yep, you're secure. Like, have you ever done that?
No. And to Jimmy's point on being good enough, he talked about risk a lot. And I think that's good, because I think when you're looking at like what is a good enough starting point, it starts with doing some sort of a risk analysis of your company and looking and seeing, okay, what is my risk? What is my biggest risk? And then looking at the NIST CSF. And then when you look at that and say, well, it says I should be doing this thing, but it doesn't even really pertain to me. Well, then, yeah, you can probably hold off on that for a while. That could be a smaller priority than maybe, you process a lot of credit cards. Let's focus on this part. Like, let's really shore this up. And when we're doing this really well consistently, now we can look at some of these other things that don't seem to matter quite as much. Because if you get too focused on the assessment as a whole, you're going to get lost, right? It's like when you have this huge project ahead of you, it's easy to get overwhelmed. You look at it and you go, there's all this stuff I got to do. And where do I start? Well, you got to just start it, right? You got to pick one, say, I'm going to tackle this milestone. And when I get to this point, I'm going to look at the next thing and I'm going to tackle that. And when you break it up like that, it becomes more manageable and a lot less overwhelming. So I think if you can just start at your direct threats and then say, okay, I'm going to address these things this year. Like by the end of this year, we want to address these parts of the NIST CSF that directly impact the absolute direct risk to our company. And then we'll look at some of these other things that might be a lower risk and should still be handled. We'll go there. And then like the last thing is usually, unfortunately, like policies and procedures. Okay, like how do we now write some language around this to get people to fully understand the whole scope of things? But anytime you can get the technological stuff tackled, especially when it's a huge risk, is the best way to go, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. I love that, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit to hear some of your perspective from a pen testing side as well. So Yoel, let me ask this. You know, we don't know what we don't know, and we go and as a business owner, as an IT team, what have you, after this conference, we look up the NIST CSF, and we're wondering where to start. You know, we need policies, we need procedures, we need inventory of digital assets. So how do we keep track of all of this? I know that there's tool sets out there that you're familiar with, but there has to be a way to kind of make this easy for an organization, because one, they're not reinventing the wheel, but they also need some way to measure some metrics on how they are doing. You're at point A, how do we get to point Z, or even
Correct.
somewhere in between? So can you talk about the tools and so on?
I'm going to tee off of Jimmy's comment about NIST CSF being the default, standard that we go in. Using an example, like new executive coming into a company, trying to get an idea of the cybersecurity maturity levels of this new responsibility that has been given to him or her, and then going in and get an idea of the landscape across, right? Usually that translates into a spreadsheet. They do keep track of the questions, and you ask the teams, and you try to keep track of the objectives. It becomes quite cumbersome to really get the detail, especially if you need to follow up with action item tasks to tee off of those answers that you received. And that's why I think that CSF in general is treated as like a standard or a base, and then move on to a more mature framework. You're exactly right. Tools take NIST to the next level. Those are the called GRC tools, governance, risk, and compliance tools, where you can then import the framework that you're using as a foundation and versus a spreadsheet. This will give you the ability to do your full assessment. It even calculates the maturity levels for you. You can collect the evidence as if you were to treat it like an audit. And then, of course, you can generate those action items to talk about what Joel and Jamie were mentioning there, of things that I need to address, gaps that you found in your cybersecurity maturity levels, and then turn those action items into projects, into tasks, into individuals, assigning ownership to those. I want to go back to the comment of a spreadsheet. We usually manage those things on some storage point that also has a lot of documents, that tracking them and mapping those to the individual controls that they need to cover becomes really difficult. Time management becomes an issue because you're constantly trying to find what's where and what type of answer I need next. When you leverage a tool like a governance, risk, and compliance tool for security, you get to do the assessment live in the tool. You get to collect all of the answers, the responses tied to that specific control. Take it a step above. You'll be able to track each individual objective and then map it, because one of the questions that we have up here is like, how do I map it to other frameworks? A GRC tool will do that almost automatically for you. If you go back and present it, hey, I want to use NIST CSF because it's a foundation, but my goal is to be SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. But I don't want to have to recreate all of that information. A GRC tool automatically creates a crosswalk between them and say, hey, by the way, Joel, you already have all of those answers kind of pre-made. Translate them into this new framework and then go from there. The other item we see it being implemented is how to keep track of what documents I need to have to be compliant with NIST. NIST kind of gives you a highlight of what it needs, but it doesn't specifically spell out you need this access control or access management policy. You need a vulnerability management policy, risk assessment, risk management. And most GRC tools explain that in plain English off the bat, saying, hey, control one, you're doing your first governance section. You have to have, no way around it, A, B, C policies populated. And it gives you even a blueprint or a template. Hey, if you don't know where to start, here is a great starting point. You have to tailor it, of course, to your organization. But that way, when you start filling those out, you see CSF grow into a mature and robust framework for cybersecurity in general. Beyond, of course, the spreadsheet going to the comment, because it's what we find based on experience. And most of our clients, people we're trying to help here, they want to take it to the next level. And using those tools, I think, is the best way to do it.
Yeah. Even something I'm thinking of is just having some type of tool or metrics to be able to communicate with your stakeholders about too, right? Because sometimes, what we do in IT, what we do in security, those metrics can be hard to measure. And I feel like these tools also, if you were to go to a stakeholder and explain to them, we need to spend all this money because we're using SSL and we need to be using TLS, they're not going to understand that. But being able to take, kind of a report card a little bit from whatever GRC tool you're using and say, well, you know what, last year we were at 10%, compliant to the NIST CSF. This year we're 35%. Here are the things that we need to do or to budget for next year to get to, X percent. And it's like Jimmy said in the beginning, you're not going to do it in a year. You're not going to do it in 6 months. It may be a few year process, but I feel like these tools make a great way for us as IT people to be able to communicate and educate the decision makers so that we can help them make good decisions. And in the end, right, these things cost money. So the better we can communicate about these things, help them understand these things, the better we are going to be as far as maybe getting that little extra budget that we need, or maybe getting that extra 10% closer to being aligned with the framework. So thoughts on that, any of you?
Part of our job on that, Mike, is translating into plain English, translating into a way that the board can read and understand and collaborate with you on solutions. Especially, like is mentioned in the comments here, when you're transitioning and you have a new version coming out, you don't want to start from scratch when the level of difficulty and maturity just went up, right? You want to be able to build a foundation to explain these things on a regular basis with graphics and trends and items that are easily read by the full audience, avoiding technical terms, but having that as a foundation when you need to purchase a new solution, do a new deployment, bring a new asset to the team to help you better address these. But at the same time, like you said, having that live and breathing document and dashboard that highlights micro changes. That way you don't have to do a full assessment to be able to show those. When you do and adjust a single item, address a single vulnerability or a gap, that should automatically be reflected and give you a historical tracking mechanism to be able to present it again and again, translate it into plain English at that point.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And do anybody else have anything to chime in there on that or comment on that?
Yeah, I will, Mike. Just coming from on the business side, I couldn't agree more, and I'll just reiterate or maybe provide some additional context. But a lot of times, and in my career, I've run into situations where on the technical side, you're vying for tools and processes and funds for things that are the right things to do to protect your business, but can struggle to get approval from management or the CFO for the funds. So having something that's able to translate that, having a business level discussion, things that you guys have already said, identifying risks. I think the biggest mistake you can make is just not knowing that you have risks, right? So going through and understanding where your risks are and making informed business decisions about which risks you can accept and which ones you can't, and getting a plan for that. So all of this helps map that out. And coming from experience, it's not just IT wants this stuff, right? This is a standard industry recognized best practices that you can follow. And I found, like, we went through our first PCI audit back in 2000 and probably 5 or 6. So very early on in that stage. And there was a lot of things that we weren't doing. And it was kind of going back to, where do you start? It can be a lot all at once when you have to go for an audit. But it really helped us get to a place we needed to be. These are good practices. It's something that is good across the board, and being able to work on these and continue to mature is a lot easier on resources, staffing, funds, than trying to jam it all in at one time. So I think it can be really helpful for, making your organization more safe.
Yeah, I agree. And there's no sense in reinventing the wheel, right? Because the information that we need is already out there. There's professionals out there that can help, right? I'm gonna plug us here. But you don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have to start somewhere and just a little bit better every single day. So yeah, I love that. So we have a question here. How often do companies need to utilize the NIST framework? So I'm going to throw that out to anybody.
Yeah, I can take that. And the short answer is once a year, right? Like, you should do this yearly. The more, I think, in-depth answer would be anytime a major implementation within the organization takes place, you should be doing this assessment. So a normal year, once a year, you run the test to make sure, because things change within an organization all the time. So the point of doing it yearly is that at the start of a new year or the end of a year, you're looking and saying, okay, as we've changed, are we still aligning with this framework in the way we were the previous year? But if you install new servers, you install new firewalls, you're installing, switching different kinds of computer types, any of those things there, you want to rerun this, because this is going to help you find, do we have things configured properly? Do we have documentation around the process that we're using for the new equipment we purchased? Are we following that? Like, all those things that you should be doing to be adherent to the NIST CSF framework is going to show up when you rerun it after you do that implementation. So I would say, again, once a year on a typical year, but if you're making any changes to infrastructure, anything like that, rerun it again, just to make sure you're covering your bases and you're still in compliance with the framework.
Yeah, and I would.
Yeah, go ahead, Jimmy.
I would add to that, and just trying to de-technical term a lot of this type of stuff. I like to try to draw some sort of metaphors, right? You wouldn't, if you were looking to build a house, you wouldn't go to a contractor and just say, build me a house. They're going to look at you and say, well, what do you mean? What do you want? Do you want a 4-bedroom house, 3-bedroom house, like what are we talking about here? 2 levels, 1 level? Do you want a garage? Do you not want a garage? So like the NIST CSF is kind of like the blueprint, right? It kind of tells you what a cybersecurity program should include. And now that doesn't mean that the blueprint's going to be fully for you. There might be things in there that, oh, okay, this doesn't apply to us. That's great. That there needs to be a risk-based decision that's made on that particular control to determine if it's applicable to you and how applicable it is, right? I mean, you asked the question earlier of what's good enough. Well, maybe being a 3 out of 4 is good enough on this control, but the next control we need to go for a 4 out of 4, where the other control is maybe a 2 out of 4, and we're fine with that, right? But I think everything goes back to that risk-based decision. And in terms of how often you need to use the NIST CSF, using the NIST CSF in terms of doing an assessment, I agree, once annually is probably a really good way to do it. Just starting off doing it once annually, or maybe even doing it once now, getting a whole bunch of recommendations, getting that 3 to 5 year roadmap, maybe doing it 2 years from then, right? Maybe it's not the best to do it annually. It depends on your situation. It depends on how far you've come. And if you want to align, continue to adhere. But in terms of how often do you use the NIST CSF? Every day, right? If you align to the NIST CSF, if you align to the framework, you're adhering to it and taking those policies, those practices, and aligning your security program or environment to the NIST air quote best practices, right? And then increasing in maturity from there.
I agree. I think it should be on our mind every day, right? Anytime we're, like all of you said, implementing something new, what have you, should definitely be just in the back of our mind all of the time. So looks like we have another question here, and thank you, everybody. I understand many of the frameworks in our industry help create strong security policies and programs that many in the organization play a role in. But how do these frameworks, specifically the CSF 2.0, relate to established technical environments like a SOC? So,
I can add some to that. Yeah, I think you're referring to it as the SOC team, not the SOC compliance requirement, is what we're talking about here. So I love it that you reference a technical background for this specific need. And like we said before, if you're not tracking any mechanisms and you have to deal with multiple industries, and basically you have to be compliant with all of them across the board, the best, without a doubt, starting point is going to be your NIST CSF. One is going to cover most of those items at a global, of course, type of approach. But then you can do the crosswalk and the mapping to the specifics that you need. So say your SOC now has a client that has to do PCI, and you already have a lot of that built in on the NIST CSF 2.0 program specifically. You can translate those into that item and then get specialized for PCI. The same goes for HIPAA. The same goes for SOCs if you're publicly traded. The same goes for like all of the banking side of things. I think that you can't go wrong with it, even if you're already specialized in one of those. Actually, I recommend that you go back and reference NIST if you're already working on PCI and that's all you were doing. Might as well go and map it to something more global and it'll help you best translate if you need to move to, like I said, from a SOC. I assume you're providing services to a wide range of industries, different clients, different compliance needs, different requirements that they need to meet. So of course, your bridge to get there, it can be a direct from PCI to something like HIPAA, or you would go through the NIST program to do it. It doesn't hurt to have it populated and all. The challenge becomes, like it was asked here, how often do you need to do it? If you don't have a tool that allows you to build that bridge and update on multiple frameworks at the same time, it becomes really cumbersome and really hard to implement. So having the right set of tools and the knowledge to do the cross-bulk across multiple frameworks makes the most sense, even for a technical environment like a SOC, like was asked.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Thank you, Ashley, for putting this up there. Okay, we have Jared. So I know Jared personally. He's in the security department for Springfield Schools, right down the road from me. He asked, being in an education environment, is there really one framework that works best, or do you think pulling from different frameworks is the reality of how to manage security? Great question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Joel. You want to take this one?
You can add on as well, but I was going to say my thoughts on that really is there's never one framework that's great for any industry, right? But it's the NIST CSF is always like your best starting point, because what you will do is once you get to a point where you're meeting the NIST CSF in most of its controls and getting the score you're looking for, you're going to move to a more mature model that maybe addresses some of the concerns you have in the educational field more in depth, right? Because what the NIST CSF was really built for originally was to be a very one-size-fits-all solution. So you're a new company, you're an old company that's not that mature in the security posture stance. You can take this and you can apply it to your industry. That's why the controls are written the way they are. They're kind of generic. Like Jimmy had said earlier on, they kind of always pointed towards the financial sector and the manufacturing sector, but you could kind of find a way to relate. How does this affect the supply chain? Well, what's the supply chain within your organization? Are you meeting those needs with that? It's so like if you use that and you find that you're meeting it, like a strict adherence to that, then you can start to lock it down and look, well, hey, what frameworks seem to point more to what I'm doing in the educational field, and now how do I take what I've been doing and then narrow that down to fit that need a little bit better.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And I can add on to that while also touching on Sam's question here, which is there's a ton of frameworks out there, right? And the NIST CSF is just one of them. Like I mentioned earlier, there's ISO 27001 and a ton of other different numbers that go in there. NIST has a ton of different frameworks of NIST 853, which most frameworks typically map back to anyway. That's kind of the grandfather of them all. NIST 80171. Australia has a cybersecurity framework. If you guys didn't know about that, Motion Pictures has their own cybersecurity framework, right? There's tons of different ones. The PCI DSS is its own cybersecurity framework. So going through and understanding which cybersecurity framework is best for you really depends on the industry that you're in. Typically what other people utilize, say most people use the NIST CSF unless they're required to use something different. Cybersecurity insurance companies usually base their questions and compliance concerns based off the NIST CSF as well. But to answer Sam's question directly, NIST isn't the most popular over in the UK/Europe, to my knowledge. GDPR has its own things that it requires, and then there's ISO 27001, which is, I think, the biggest over in Europe specifically. And the NIST CSF is kind of the NA version of ISO 27001. They're very, very similar. Like I said, all frameworks are pretty much sisters of each other. They kind of require or want the same things. They just say it in a little bit different of a way. But picking one, adhering to that is probably a big challenge, because you need to pick the one that's best for you. And there are tons of resources out there. CISA, which is another government agency, has a lot of resources out there on picking the right framework and things that it recommends, just like NIST. But I would recommend reading the different frameworks, picking one that you like, that you understand, and then adhering your cybersecurity program to that.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, like what you were saying about, you might be subject to PCI. FTC safeguard rule is another one with student loans and things like that might be applicable. We see sometimes even that, higher ed wants to go through and get their SOC 2, compliance, but watch for what you are obligated, your regulatory requirements are. But NIST really is easy to map, again, because a lot of what's in there is just good cybersecurity practice, right? So it's nothing in there is going to be wasteful, I would say. It's good to start there, and then you can map it to whatever you are required to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And to further that, Terry, if you look at a school, you might have some HIPAA requirements there. You might have some PCI requirements for lunch payments that parents are making, and so on. So yeah, I agree.
I have just one other add-on for the question about NIST being used in UK and Europe. It will, like Jimmy said, it'll work. The only downfall to using NIST in the UK is I don't believe that some of the governance questions will cover personal data requirements that you have in the UK that are, the US is a little bit more lax in that department, where Europe has a lot stricter regulation around how you deal with personal data. But for the most part, everything else should map. It's just like once you get to the governance side of things, you're going to have to kind of move over to the European model for that part of it.
Yeah, they're all used everywhere, right? NIST is used in the UK and Europe. It's just not the most popular thing, right? And there's ISO being used in the US as well. There's a ton of different frameworks being used all over the globe. And every industry really kind of wants to make their own, right? And the NIST CSF is just a great de facto standard that a lot of cybersecurity professionals know. And it's very easily digestible, I think. And I think the 2.0 change makes it even more digestible than ISO and HIPAA and PCI. Now, HIPAA, there's regulatory compliance reasons that you have to comply to that. But in terms of digestibility, I think the NIST CSF is the easiest in terms of adhering.
So Joel, let me go back to you here for a second. You're a hacker, right? But you're a professional ethical hacker. And so you're working with organizations all the time to help them find vulnerabilities so you can explain them to them, help them get them mitigated, remediated, what have you. So what do you think some of your most common findings are that you see around that, if they were aligned to some type of framework, in this CSF, what have you, might not be such as common of a finding if they were maybe aligned?
Yeah, I think where you see how NIST applies to what I do specifically is the fact that misconfigurations are a huge problem, right? Like 90% of the time when I find success, it's not because they're using old equipment or they don't have experienced people. It's just that things aren't configured properly. And it's a number of things, right? It's a lack of expertise maybe in the staff because they got some new equipment and someone had to learn it quick and get it up and running and maybe didn't fully understand things, or there's not enough employees. And so you got 3 guys doing the work of 10 guys. And when you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions, it's easy to start on something and say, okay, I'm going to configure this firewall. And then they go, hey, we need you to do this thing. And you go over there and then you sit back down. And you're like, oh yeah, I did that task, move to the next one. And things kind of get mixed up in the middle. And, it always, I think it's glamorous to think that you do all these crazy things and it's super hard to get in. But the reality is that a lot of times it's simple things like someone left the default password on their iDRAC or things like that allow you to get kind of a full access to the network where you're had someone just caught this little thing, it would have made my job 10 times harder. So, and that falls under, the detect portion, it falls under protect. Right? Because we're not detecting that we have misconfigurations. We're not properly protecting the devices. And in some cases, we're not even able to tell that someone's in the network. So our response, we're not hitting respond either. So, and it's that's where the pen test is able to help you find out as you start to adhere to these controls, whether or not you're doing a good job of adhering to them. But I would say if you're not doing any of these, you should start, because I do a lot of talks, and kind of the caveat to every talk I've ever done is that what I do is important. I it adds a lot of value to a company, But if you're not following some sort of a framework, whether it's NIST or anything else, what I do offers you zero value at the end of the day, really, right? Like, because I can tell you how to fix a technological problem. I can say, hey, this thing's misconfigured, fix it. But how are you going to know you're catching the next thing that's misconfigured? Because it's already proven to be a problem. So, like, if you're not at the right maturity level and you're not following frameworks like this, like all the pen testing in the world, all the people showing you where problems here and there are, isn't going to help you. It's like being on a sinking ship, right? Like, I'm going to help you just start plugging holes, but eventually we're going to sink one way or the other because we're not.
A pen test is a point in time. You know, my years being a pen tester, if I would work with a company and help them find these vulnerabilities, but then come back the next year and we got the same vulnerabilities or a ton of new ones, a lot of times it's not the vulnerabilities that are the problem, because we have to get to the root of the problem. Why do we keep having these consistent vulnerabilities? Okay, well, maybe there's not, you mentioned misconfiguration. Well, the first thing I think of as a vCISO is, well, if there's misconfiguration, we must not have strong configuration hardening standards, so then we go back to, are we aligned with the framework? Because if we were properly aligned with the framework, we're going to have the policies, we're going to have the procedures, the standards, and then slowly over time, those vulnerabilities are going to start going away, right? Because we're not throwing new ones out every single day. And just like you said, you just keep chasing it and chasing it. So,
yeah. And if I can add, guys, because I know, Joel, you did that presentation for the PA Chamber a couple years ago, and we talked about when do you do a pen test? And if you're not doing the basics, you should start there, right? The pen test is meant to test the things that you have in place. Are the policies and procedures working? Are the protective technologies working? Does your team have the ability to detect that we're in there doing these pen tests? If you don't have those things in place, take the money that you would have spent on a pen test and invest in putting those basics in place first. The pen test is to test all those things. If you don't have them in place, use the money to get to a good spot first.
You're better off to take that money that you were going to do a pen test with and put it toward a vCISO service, to have someone come in and look at the organization, see where you stand, give you a report card, and help you lay out a roadmap, right? Yep. Or you just keep chasing it.
Yeah, like I said, from my standpoint, where my skills are best served within an organization is helping you find out things you're supposed to do, but maybe just didn't implement properly, or you thought you had it implemented, you didn't. Because I've run into cases where I've got into machines and I'm like, I wouldn't have been able to traverse the entire network had you segmented this. And like, well, it's segmented. And then I can come back and say, well, it's not. And then they can look and go, oh, we just missed this part. We knew to do that. We just, somewhere along the line, something happened. Okay, now we fix that. So in that standpoint, that's where my skill set's going to help you, because I'm going to say, okay, we just need to shore these things up, but to do it. You thought you did it and you didn't. So good on me for catching it and helping you fix it. As opposed to me saying, you have like a plethora of problems. And then they said, well, how do we fix this? Well,
where to start?
I can tell you how to fix it, but it's like, I can teach you to tie your shoes, but if you don't take the time to learn it, you're going to keep needing me to do it. And that's not where you want to be as an organization. You want to be able to fix these things on your own and know what you're supposed to fix. And then just have someone come in and say, okay, yeah, you say you're in a good place. I'm confirming that for you now. You're following all the things you're supposed to follow. And I'm going to help you confirm that. And that's really the best use of penetration testing when you're looking at NIST CSF. Like, how well have we implemented this now? Because we think we're good. We want someone else to come in and just give us a confirmation on that.
So Joel, go ahead. Go ahead, Terry.
Sorry. I was going to say, to your point, everybody's human and mistakes happen. So you might know to do these things like Joel said, but it's a really good validation of human error. But also, you mentioned this, it really does help when we are blocked by certain things, or we can come back to you and say, you know what, the investments you made in these things helped protect you. So it continues to support the investments you're making in the company on the tools and technologies and policies. So it's not all in there to just find what's bad. We actually are also pointing out what's good in your environment. And that's really helpful if you're in a role where you're looking to, get more money to do to further protect your organization.
You might be
And-
surprised, having an assessment, you might be doing better than you think you're doing, just because of, like you said, Terry, the investment in tools and the team, that you've had over the years. So that kind of leads me into my next question. Joel, that was perfect. If you were to walk, and this is for any of you, if you were to walk into an organization today and they have no security program in place at all, right? Where would you recommend starting?
I can start that off. If I was to walk in day one, nothing in place, policies and procedures. I firmly believe that policies and procedures are the most important thing you can do as an organization, simply because it lays down a groundwork for the proper implementation of everything you're going to do, right? Because I can say, hey, I'm going to configure a server, and Jimmy can do it, and Yoel can do it. And the way I do it is going to be different from the way Jimmy does it and from the way Yoel does it, which is good and bad, right? It shows that all three of us know how to do things and we can solve problems in different ways. It's bad from a company standpoint because nobody knows what's getting done and how it's getting done. And so it makes it easier to miss it. So when you have a procedure that says, when you bring up a server, you follow these steps to a T. That way, if there's a breakdown somewhere, Jimmy can come behind me or Yoel can come behind me and say, okay, he missed this step. And I just have to pick up from here and I can continue to go, rather than let me dig around, see what he did, try and figure all this mess out, and then, waste a bunch of time. Or even still, if you have like new people coming in who maybe don't have like a lot of expertise, like this is going to kind of be the training wheels they need to say, okay, when we set this stuff up, this is the method at which we do it at this company. And then with the policies, right? The policies just give you the language around why you're doing things, right? And that's important as well. Or even, this is our expectation of you as an employee when you're in this role. We want you to do it this way. And if this isn't done, then this is the repercussion that follows. And then once you have a strong handle on your policies and procedures, then you can start to move into adding technical controls, because the technical controls is what's going to prevent you from doing it. The policies are what telling you not to do it. So you want to kind of have both to fall back on, because in some instances, there might not even be a control that you can put in place technologically to stop them, and then you need that policy. But starting at policies, moving to technology, and then looking at kind of more of the governance stuff after that, because I think governance is really where you get to like the highest level of maturity, is where you say, okay, now we're ready to start really adhering to these things from a compliance level. But I wouldn't worry about compliance if you have nothing in place first. Like, that would be a bad starting point, in my opinion.
Well, I would add to that you can also look at the requirements that you have to comply with, even if there is no knowledge in-house. On what to look for, you have to go and research your industry, the field, the future goals of the organization, to see what level of compliance you have to have. That way, when you write those initial set of policies, do follow that to an extent, and you only need to go back and revisit them or update them as you need. But looking at the requirement levels not only gives you a framework to work off of, but it also gives you specific needs for technology that might not be there and you need to implement down the line.
Yeah, I think that's really the first question. That if I walked into a company and they said, we have nothing, like, hey man, we don't do anything from cybersecurity, we have just been keeping the lights on from an IT perspective, what should we do? The first question I'm going to ask is, do you have any regulatory compliance that you have to adhere to? Right? We talk about PCI DSS, we talk about HIPAA, GDPR has been thrown out there. There's cybersecurity insurance stuff that you might need to adhere to. There are maybe laws and regulations that are from a federal or a state level. There might be things in contracts that you have to adhere to. There are certain things that we would have to look at prior to even selecting a framework. And then in selecting a framework, I would ask them, who's going to be the decision maker, right? Who's in charge of the cybersecurity program, and who are the stakeholders that are supporting this? Because a lot of times, if you go to a client and it's an IT manager or something like that, but there's senior leadership above them that doesn't have buy-in into what the IT manager is making in terms of decisions, you can make any decision you want, but there's going to be no support financially. So I would want to garnish support from senior leadership, the decision makers, and understand what the potential budget is for that, even before selecting or trying to look at what we need to do from a governance perspective, or even look, where the gaps are. But understanding who's responsible at the top, who's going to be accountable. And I think someone made it a mention in the comments, but defining a RACI matrix, understanding who's going to be responsible, who the head honchos are, who's going to approve the policies, right? Who's going to enforce the policies? And policies are great. And as the writer of a policy and an advocate of policies, policies are fantastic, but they don't do anything if you don't actually implement them or enforce them as well. And I think that's a big piece that a lot of people miss. They say, "Oh, great, our policies are compliant with this. I can write a policy that's compliant with a whole lot of stuff." But if you don't actually do it, that's a big problem. So I would probably go through and try to find the regulatory compliance areas that they need to, comply with from a legal perspective, whatever contract perspective, whatever it may be. And then I would work to try to identify who the decision makers are, what that foundation is for support. Maybe understand a budget, and budgets are always can go up and down over time, but understand what that initial desire is to get increased cybersecurity maturity, then look to try to find a framework that we can adhere to and create some of those policies while also addressing from a technical perspective major security gaps.
I think one of the main takeaways that I have from this and that I kind of just put out to others, right? You don't have to be an expert at the NIST CSF. You don't have to be an expert at IT or cybersecurity, because a lot of you here are business owners, managers, what have you. So I would say find that expertise out there, right? So that you let them do their job to help you, so that you can continue doing your job, running your business. So there are people out there, right? You guys, that do this stuff. We do this stuff every single day. So reach out, right? And I'm gonna keep this flowing because I know we're running a little bit short on time here. So I'm gonna go to my next question, which semi-relates. What's a common struggle when an organization is trying to build out a security posture aligning with the framework, and how can we help, right? And Terry, if you don't mind, I think you wanted to key in on this one. I'm gonna give this one to you.
Yeah, and I actually ended up finding a spot earlier to cover some of this, but I think the struggle often is getting the buy-in from executive leaders, from CFOs to make the investments you need to. That the framework can really help you do that. Again, because this isn't something that is just individually based. It just gives you that backing to know that this is what we should be following. It's industry best practices. And to the point of Yoel and Jimmy, having that, being able to put that into an executive overview brief, keep it, always relate things to the business, how it can protect you, protect your brand, protect your reputation, actually turn it into a revenue generating conversations. Because we see a lot of times some of our clients are doing this because their big clients are asking them, what are you doing? What framework are you following? You can position this as, hey, this is how we're protecting our clients' information and win business. We've seen it happen. It really can happen. So have those conversations, have executive level reports, use the tools to help portray that information. And I think it'll be really helpful.
And, I don't think that I would be doing justice if I didn't, say how blessed and lucky I am to work with this team and with all of you and with Appalachia Technologies. Many of you that see our content out there, I talk about Appalachia Tech a lot. Definitely proud to work with them. So I thought I would take a moment and let Terry just kind of comment again, just tell us a little bit about Appalachia. Everyone's tired of hearing about it from me. So, give us your take. Give us your take.
Yeah, happy to. And if you couldn't tell, I really do love working here. And I think one of the things that I love about who we are is, we're technologists and cyber enthusiasts at heart. If you were to see the conversations we have at all hours of the day and night with this team, it's really great and comical at times and scary, because sometimes it's like more than I want to actually know. We're a leading IT and cybersecurity provider, and we're excited to celebrate that this is our 20th anniversary in business. We have roughly 45 employees right now, and we're services only, which means we're not selling hardware and software. It's consulting, it's managed IT, it's pen testing, security assessments, all of those things. And beyond security, it's on the infrastructure and systems side as well. But we lead with culture because, since we don't make a widget, our people are our product. So it also helps us to retain and attract the best talent, which I personally think we have. So that's who we are at a high level. And if you want to switch to the next slide, Ashley, our core competencies, we have two arms. One is the managed services side, where we can do, proactively monitor, manage, and protect our clients' environments. This can be if a company doesn't have an IT team, maybe they're small. A lot of times we're their IT and security team. For larger organizations, it's more of a co-managed scenario where we're helping be an escalation point, or maybe they've got the IT side down but need help with security. And then in the consulting side, projects that we can do, implementations, assessments, pen testing, and all of that. And then I always say that the last one on that list is the one we never want to use, and that's breach response. So we prefer not to engage in that service, but we are here if somebody encounters an incident or suspect they have one. Obviously, I think we're pretty cool, but just some of our awards and certifications to show that it's not just us who think that. We're best places to work in PA. This is based on employee surveys. So this is what our staff, how they feel about us, and we use this information to get better every year. We're a top MSSP and a top MSP in the industry. We are SOC 2 Type 2 audited, and for those in the DIB or DoD space, we are an RPO, a registered provider organization for CMMC. And then the last piece is some giveaways here for anybody who attended the event. We have a NIST pocket guide that we developed based on some of the information that Mike Miller has already shared. It gives a nice overview and some of the, I would say, key takeaways from each of the pillars in the NIST framework, and also some additional links to resources. We're also offering a 30-minute consultation to discuss how you can better secure your environment. It can be with any of the folks on this panel here. And finally, we're offering a discount on a NIST assessment if you book by June 30th. And if you want to take us up on any of these offers, just send us an email to info@appalachiatech.com and put in the subject line NIST webinar offer so we know what you're reaching out about.
The pocket guide's really cool. So if everyone gets a chance, just email info@appalachiatech.com. Don't miss that opportunity. And I would just kind of back what Terry said and, use that time. We're offering our time to help you as an organization or as a business try to sleep better in the evening, right? So that you don't have to worry as much. So leverage that time is what I would say. So any closing statements from anybody? I would just like to say thank you for everybody that was here. Thank you for the team. Thank you, Appalachia. And I'm going to give a special thanks to Janed, who is floating around in the background. He's been answering some of these comments. He's fantastic. He works for Appalachia Tech, one of the smartest guys I know. He's always here helping us out. He's just a good guy. So I'm going to ding him later about that. So, but any closing statements from anybody before we roll out?
I think overall that there's a lot of changes that happened to the NIST CSF 2.0, right? Some minor, some major. I think the biggest thing is just to look and read. I mean, it's out there. You can go to NIST website, download the NIST CSF 2.0, take some time to go through and read it. I at least enjoy that, but I'm also a cybersecurity nerd. So for some people, I know that it'll probably put them to sleep. But just knowing how it would adhere to your organization and just read and make a decision on if you think that it is what's best for you. NIST has a ton of free resources. There's a ton of other organizations out there that have free resources. And, as Terry and Mike have said, we're all super, involved in cybersecurity, right? We live, eat, breathe cybersecurity. It's our passion, or else we wouldn't really be working in this industry because it is a difficult one to work in. But take us up on the offer of getting the free consultation, talk with one of us in terms of where you are, and maybe the NIST CSF is right for you. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's another framework, that would be best. But yeah, that's probably my closing thoughts.
All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll just say thank you, everyone, for the comments and the questions. There's nothing better than having engagement and being able to help, because that's why we're here. So appreciate all that. And Mike, like you said, anything that we couldn't get to here, we'll follow up on.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. Reach out, and from Appalachian Tech, and everybody have a fantastic day and the rest of the week. Take care.
See y'all.